Number 3. Sheryl Blundell. Sheryl Blundell was a 10-year-old girl who lived with her parents and 2 younger brothers in Stouffville, Ontario, Canada, a small town about an hour's drive north of Toronto. On the evening of February 6, 1973, Sheryl and her brothers were at home with a babysitter and Sheryl's friend, Lynn Sprague. Shortly after 7 p.m., Sheryl and Lynn convinced the babysitter to let them walk to a nearby variety store to buy candy. While the girls were on their way to the store, a car pulled up next to the sidewalk. The driver, a woman with a box of kittens on the passenger seat, asked the girls for directions to a nearby veterinarian office. At first, the girls remained on the sidewalk and spoke to the woman through the passenger's side window. For unclear reasons, the woman asked the girls to come over to the driver's side on the street to speak to her. The girls did, and moments later, both were struck by a westbound car. Lynn regained consciousness a few moments later. The force of the impact had knocked her out of her shoes, but she was able to run to her home and tell her mother what had happened. Emergency services were called, who quickly found Sheryl still lying in the street. Tragically, she died while en route to the hospital. According to a witness, the driver of the car that struck the girls briefly slowed down after the impact before speeding away. The only evidence recovered were gray and red paint chips found on the victim's clothing. In 1978, a local man in his 20s was arrested in connection with the case, but there was not enough evidence to charge him. It is unknown if he is still considered a suspect, or even if he is still alive and living in the area, as his name was never made public. In the years since, tips have occasionally come in, and as recently as 2013, leads were still being actively pursued. However, as of the time of this video, the case remains unsolved. Number 2. Sakanosuke Tabata. March 3rd is celebrated as Hina Matsuri in Japan. Hina Matsuri, translated as Doll Festival, is a day where parents celebrate their daughter's happiness, growth, and good health, and it is customary to display ceremonial dolls. On Hina Matsuri of 1978, a 3-year-old boy, Sakanosuke Tabata, was playing outside near his home in Samino-ku, a suburb of Osaka. At around 4:30 p.m., Tabata was struck by a car in front of his horrified friend, a 5-year-old neighbor boy. Tabata lay in the road, either unconscious or dead, with blood flowing from his face. The car stopped and a man got out. He rushed over to the 5-year-old and asked him who the boy was. He then said that there was no time to wait for an ambulance and that he would take Tabata to the hospital himself. He picked up Tabata, placed him in his car, and drove quickly away. The 5-year-old immediately ran to Tabata's home and told his mother what had happened. She rushed back to the scene, but the man and his car were long gone. Tabata's mother called several nearby hospitals, but no one matching Tabata's description had been brought in. She then contacted the police. Based on interviews with the 5-year-old and several adults who had witnessed the incident, police classified the case as a kidnapping and stated they believed Tabata was still alive when the man placed him in his car. A description of the man was publicized in hope of identifying him. Unfortunately, likely due to the short amount of time he was observed and the young age of the main witness, the description was vague. He was described only as being a middle-aged man, approximately 40 years old, not wearing a suit, and driving a white car, possibly a Toyota Corolla. There are several possibilities of what happened to Sakanosuke Tabata. The first is that the man intended to take him to a hospital, but either realized he was dead, or Tabata died during the journey, and the man hid his body to avoid possible legal consequences. There is also the possibility that Tabata was not dead, and that the man murdered him instead of taking him to the hospital. There is also the very small chance that Tabata survived and is perhaps still alive somewhere today. As of 1993, the statute of limitations expired on all crimes the unidentified man may have committed, including murder, as prior to 2005, the statute of limitations on murder in Japan was only 15 years. As the man was middle-aged in 1978, he would today be in his 70s or 80s if he is still alive. On the small chance that Sakanosuke Tabata is still alive, he would today be 44 years old. Number 1. Kevin Showalter. On Christmas Eve of 1973, 20-year-old college student Kevin Showalter and his girlfriend, Deborah Emilita, were traveling towards Showalter's home. Just 2 blocks from the residence, Emilita's car blew a tire, and she was forced to pull over to the side of the road. Emilita had a spare, so Kevin got out of the car to change it. It was just past 11 p.m. in the small town of New London, Connecticut. The residential street where the couple had stopped was quiet and dimly lit. As Kevin crouched down to change the tire, a speeding car struck him. Emilita and several witnesses, drawn out of their homes by the commotion, witnessed the car continue speeding down the street without slowing. An ambulance arrived to the scene within 4 minutes of the collision, but sadly, Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene. New London police opened an investigation into Kevin's death, but they had very little to go on. Due to the dim lighting and the speed the car was traveling, none of the witnesses got a good look at it. The only clue were dark green paint chips found on Kevin's clothing. A few weeks after the incident, Kevin's mother, Lucille, went to the New London police station to collect Kevin's personal items that had been with him when he died. While there, she was told bluntly that they had been lost. A policeman then told her that the case would never be solved and that she should move on with her life. Furious, and believing that the police were not taking the case seriously, she launched her own investigation. Lucille searched used car lots and repair centers looking for a green car and scoured the neighborhood for green vehicles with front-end damage. She lobbied for media coverage of her son's case and appealed to state investigators to become involved. She also conducted interviews with neighborhood residents, one of whom, Harvey Malov, had some interesting information to offer. Born in 1927, Malov was the former mayor of New London. After leaving office sometime in the 1960s, he became a jewelry merchant and was one of New London's wealthiest residents. Malov told Lucille that he had driven by the scene of the accident on Christmas Eve at 11:12 p.m., approximately 1 minute after Kevin had been hit. He claimed he had observed a dark green car driven by a middle-aged man pulled over at the side of the road, and said that the driver was talking to a young woman outside of the car, who may have been Kevin's girlfriend, Deborah. Lucille's lobbying eventually paid off, and in 1976, the governor of Connecticut assigned a one-man grand jury to the case. The case ended up being the most expensive and extensive hit-and-run investigation up to that point, with Connecticut State Police spending over $1 million and calling 107 witnesses to testify. With Superior Court Judge Joseph Dennehy proceeding, the investigation lasted for over 5 months and led to some startling conclusions, with Judge Dennehy stating that the New London police had done virtually nothing to find the hit-and-run driver. The investigation also revealed that not only had the New London police lost Kevin's personal belongings, they had also lost other evidence from the crime scene, including a piece of plastic from a signal light and a large green paint chip. Even more egregious was the revelation that the one piece of evidence the police did have, the small green paint chips found on Kevin's clothing, had most likely been planted after the fact and did not come from impact with the car. The shocking revelations of the investigation were not over yet. Harvey Malov testified with the same story he had told Lucille about driving past the accident and seeing a mysterious man in a green car talking to a young woman. No other witness backed up his claim, including Deborah Emilita, who testified that there was no green car, no middle-aged man, and she had spoken to no one in the manner that Malov claimed. As well, none of the witnesses had observed Malov drive by, stating that no one passed by the scene during the time of the incident and the arrival of the ambulance at 11:15. Reviewing the witness testimony, Judge Dennehy concluded that Harvey Malov was probably the driver who had struck Kevin, shocking Lucille, who had looked at Malov as a good Samaritan. However, Dennehy recommended against persecuting Malov, stating that since key evidence was missing and other evidence was likely tampered with, the case had been hopelessly bungled. Malov rejected the findings, proclaiming his innocence. He took a lie detector test in relation to the case, which he passed. He also hired a private detective, both to clear his own name and to find the real culprit. In a newspaper interview, Lucille stated that she agreed with Judge Dennehy's statement that Malov being the hit-and-run driver was more probable than not, and she felt vindicated by the state police's extensive investigation after the brush-off she had received from the New London police. In 1979, a year after the grand jury investigation, the case took another turn when New London resident Paul Hansen confessed to being the hit-and-run driver. Hansen had been at a Christmas party on the night Kevin was killed and drove himself home despite being blackout drunk. While driving down the street where Kevin was killed, he felt a minor impact, but he did not see what he had hit. When he woke up the next morning, his car had minor front-end damage. For 6 years, he wrestled with his conscience before deciding to come forward. Too much time had passed for Hansen to be charged in Kevin's death, but another grand jury was ordered to investigate his confession. The investigation ruled that his confession was baseless and lacked any corroborating evidence. The transcripts of this investigation, along with the transcripts of the previous grand jury, were ordered to be sealed, and the case faded from public view. Harvey Malov continued to insist he was innocent until his death of natural causes in 1989. Paul Hansen committed suicide in 2005 at the age of 55, leaving behind a note in which he again accepted responsibility for Kevin's death and described the guilt he had lived with for over 3 decades. The death of Hansen prompted renewed media interest in Kevin's case, and a local newspaper, The Day of New London, launched their own cold case investigation, requesting the grand jury transcripts. A judge denied the request, stating that the case was too old to be relevant. A second newspaper, the Hartford Courant, took issue with the judge's denial, suggesting that there may be evidence of a collusion or cover-up buried within the files. It would appear that perhaps the papers were onto something, as it was later discovered that the transcripts no longer existed. Over 3,000 pages of documents covering the 2 grand jury investigations had mysteriously vanished. There were no copies made. With that finding, it seems unlikely that there will ever be a satisfactory resolution to the case. Many believe the evidence indicates that the New London police were covering for someone. As the former mayor and one of the town's most wealthy residents, many suspect that Malov was the one they were covering for. However, this leads to more questions. Why would Malov insert himself into the investigation if he was being covered for? If he was innocent, why make up a story about a green car and a mysterious driver? Was Paul Hansen the driver, or did undeserved guilt cause an innocent man to take his own life? If Hansen was the driver, then why the apparent cover-up? Was the real driver perhaps a third person, someone other than Malov, Who held a position of power and influence in the community? Who was being covered for? Unfortunately, these are questions that will likely remain unanswered. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe, and check out my other videos for more content just like it. Thanks for watching.